If she vanished for a year, why did she go ghost white the second my door opened and she saw who stood there? What did that one witness know about her fun, and why did her comeback suddenly feel like a trap with a deadline? My name is Pierce Madden, and I learned long ago that people only respect boundaries after they test them. I was sorting mail I did not care about in a quiet apartment I paid for, enjoying the honest boredom of my own life. The building had that late afternoon hush, the kind that makes you believe nothing bad can happen until dinner. Then my phone lit up with her name, the name that had been missing from my days for a year, the name I had stopped rehearsing in my mind because rehearsal keeps wounds open. Dana did not ease back into my life the way normal people return from distance, because normal people carry shame like luggage and set it down carefully. She returned like a landlord collecting rent, like I had been squatting in her marriage while she was out living. Her message was neat and confident, as if it had been edited for tone and impact, and the entitlement was so clean it almost looked professional. I read it once, then again, because the second read is where you notice the assumptions. She assumed the door would still open for her. She assumed my memory was a soft thing she could press into any shape. She assumed the past year was her private vacation and my private punishment, and that the calendar could be rewound because she was ready again. A year away is a long time to be silent, and it is an even longer time to expect gratitude for returning. I did not reply immediately, because immediate replies are fuel for people who run on control. I let the message sit on my screen like a note left by someone who thought she owned the desk. The timing was not accidental, and I could tell because nothing about Dana was accidental when she wanted something. The city was starting its charity season, and the building lobby had been filled with event flyers and carefully dressed strangers all week. Dana loved public rooms, because public rooms give you witnesses who do not know the whole story. I had spent the last year learning to live without her as the main character, and that had changed the geometry of my home. The apartment no longer felt like a stage set for her entrance, and that difference mattered more than I expected. When the doorbell rang 15 minutes after the text, I felt the punchline arrive before the joke. I did not rush, and I did not straighten my shirt, because I refused to let my body participate in her fantasy. I walked to the entryway at the same pace I would use for a delivery, and I looked through the peephole without panic. Dana stood outside in a pale coat that tried to look casual and expensive, her hair styled to signal effort without apology. She held her phone at her side like a weapon that could become a shield at any moment. Her face wore the expression she used when she wanted to be seen as brave and wronged at the same time, which is a difficult expression to maintain if you are not practiced. I watched her shoulders and her breathing, because shoulders and breathing always betray the story the face is selling. She was not nervous in the way a guilty wife is nervous, and she was not hesitant in the way a remorseful wife is hesitant. She was keyed up like a person approaching a meeting where she expected to win. I reached for the lock and stopped, not because I was afraid, but because I remembered the building's rules. The doorman, Talia Reed, had a habit of stepping in when certain visitors appeared, because she took building security more seriously than the people who paid for it. Talia was the kind of person who noticed patterns and remembered times, and she did it without making you feel watched until you realized you were being measured. I had spoken to her more than once over the past year, mostly in polite fragments, because she saw things in the lobby that residents preferred not to know. She was also the kind of witness no one could accuse of being biased for me, because she did not owe me anything. When I heard the soft sound of her shoes behind the door, I understood why Dana had chosen this building for her entrance, and I understood why the building had chosen to answer back. Talia opened the door before I could, using her master key like it was standard procedure, and she did it with the calm authority of someone who knows the rules better than the people breaking them. Dana's face changed in a single second, and the change was so sharp it looked like a physical reaction. The confident mask fell away, and what replaced it was not surprise alone, but recognition mixed with dread. She went ghost white, and the color drained from her cheeks so quickly that her makeup looked like a bad decision. Her eyes fixed on Talia, not on me, as if Talia was the only person in the doorway who mattered. That was the moment my private story became something else, because only one kind of person reacts like that to a doorman. A person reacts like that when the doorman has seen something they cannot erase. Talia kept her voice neutral, asked Dana whether she was expected, and asked it in a way that made expectation sound like a legal term. Dana's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, and what came out was a careful phrase about coming home and making things right. The words were meant for me, but the tone was meant for Talia, as if Dana were trying to manage the witness before she managed the husband. I could almost admire the instinct if it were not so ugly. I watched Dana's hands as she tightened her grip on her phone, and I watched her eyes flick toward the hallway camera like she remembered exactly where it was mounted. She had not been gone from this building long enough to forget the angles. I did not step aside to invite her in, because invitations are symbols, and symbols matter to people like Dana. I asked calmly what she wanted, and I asked it like a man speaking to someone who had shown up without an appointment. Dana tried to frame it as reconciliation, as a reset, as a mature return after youthful wandering, and she did it with a bright smile that looked strained under the new pressure. Talia's presence ruined the rhythm, because Dana could no longer pretend the door belonged only to us. Dana glanced at Talia again, and that glance was a confession written in body language. She did not fear my reaction as much as she feared what Talia might say if the conversation went on. Talia, to her credit, did not play hero, and she did not play gossip, because she understood her power. She simply stood there quietly and watched, which was worse for Dana than any accusation. Dana tried to turn her attention back to me, to reclaim the old dynamic where she could steer the conversation by pushing emotion. She said she had been away, she said she had learned things, she said she was ready now, and she said it all as if readiness was the only requirement. I did not ask where she had been, because a year of silence is not explained by geography. I asked why she was here now, today, and why she had texted first instead of calling. The question was simple and neutral, and it forced her to choose between honesty and performance. Performance was her default, so she chose performance, but performance stutters when a witness is present. She took a breath and tried a softer approach, mentioning shared history and future plans, implying that the year away had been a detour rather than a departure. I listened without nodding, because nodding encourages people to keep lying. Talia shifted her weight slightly, a small movement that told me she was noting time and posture, collecting details without making a show of it. Dana noticed the movement, and her smile tightened again. That tightening confirmed what my instincts had started to suspect. Dana's return was not about love or guilt. Dana's return was about timing, and the timing had something to do with what Talia knew. I asked Dana whether she planned to stay in the building again, and I asked it as a logistics question, because logistics strip romance out of the room. Dana hesitated, then said she assumed she would, because she was my wife, and that word came out like a badge she had not earned. I told her we would not assume anything, because assumptions were how she had treated our marriage last year. I said we could schedule a talk, if she wanted, in a neutral place, with daylight, and with clear boundaries. Dana's eyes widened slightly, and she tried to hide disappointment behind indignation. She wanted an intimate scene, because intimate scenes are easier to rewrite later. Neutral places create memories other people can validate, and that was dangerous for her. Talia finally spoke again, calmly, asking Dana whether she needed assistance leaving because the building did not allow visitors to linger at resident doors without permission. Dana flinched at the phrase "without permission," and that flinch was almost comical in its honesty. She murmured that she would go, then tried to recover by saying she would return later when I was ready to talk. The way she said when I was ready carried the old implication that my readiness was just a phase she could outwait. I did not correct her, because correcting her would turn this into a fight in the hallway. Instead, I thanked Talia for opening the door, and I thanked her in the same tone I would use for any professional act, because Dana needed to see that I recognized which person had real authority in that moment. Dana stepped backward, then paused, and her eyes met mine for the first time since the door had opened. In that look there was anger, but also calculation, and calculation is what keeps people like her alive when their plans wobble. She looked as if she wanted to say something sharp, something that would provoke me into confirming her narrative. I gave her nothing, because nothing is the most expensive gift you can give a manipulator. She turned and walked toward the elevator, and her shoulders were stiff, as if she were holding herself together with muscle alone. Talia waited until Dana was out of earshot, then glanced at me with a neutral expression that carried a quiet question. I did not ask Talia what she knew, because asking would turn her into a character in my revenge, and I refused to recruit her like that. I only asked whether Dana had been here recently, and I asked it like a resident concerned about security. Talia answered carefully, saying only that Dana's face was familiar for reasons that were not social. The line was short, but it landed like a weight. Talia then reminded me that lobby cameras existed, but she did not offer access or favors, because she was smarter than that. She simply said that some people forget that buildings remember, and she left me standing in my doorway with a new understanding of my wife's fear. When I closed the door, my apartment felt different, like the walls had shifted a few inches inward. Dana's text still sat on my phone screen, and now it looked less like a romantic provocation and more like an opening move in a game. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the blank surface where I usually worked through mundane tasks. A year away had not made Dana humble, and it had not made her wise. It had made her bolder, because she believed absence erased accountability. But her reaction in the doorway proved something vital. Whatever she had done while she was gone, it had happened close enough to home that the doorman recognized the pattern. And if my wife had returned with entitlement instead of remorse, then I had only one path that made sense. I would not fight her with emotion, because emotion is a toy she knows how to break. I would fight her with dates, with receipts, with witnesses who do not care about her charm, and with records that do not bend when she smiles. I slept badly that night, not because I missed her, but because unanswered questions leave sharp corners in the mind. The next morning, I reread her text like it was a contract clause, because the language mattered more than the sentiment. She had not said she was sorry, and she had not asked whether I wanted her back. She had announced that she was ready, as if readiness was a door key she could still use. That was the first piece of evidence, even if it did not look like evidence yet, because entitlement is always tied to a plan. I made coffee and opened my laptop at the kitchen table, choosing routine because routine keeps you from doing something stupid. I did not Google her, and I did not call mutual friends, because rumor is a drug that makes you feel informed while making you sloppy. If Dana had learned anything during her year away, she would have learned how to control narratives, and narratives are strongest where facts are weakest. I needed facts that belonged to me, facts I could obtain without begging, and facts that would stand up in a room full of strangers. Household-level truth is boring by design, but it does not disappear when someone gets emotional. The simplest starting point was my own spending, because I knew what I had paid for and what I had not. Dana and I had separated our finances in a half-hearted way before she left, the kind of half-separation people do when they still believe reconciliation will fix everything. One shared account still existed for basic household payments, and a few subscriptions were still attached to my card because I had been too busy to detach them at the time. I opened my banking app and filtered by the last 12 months, scanning for irregularities the way I scan a document for a forged date stamp. At first it was just noise, normal payments, normal expenses, normal life without her. Then patterns started to appear and patterns are where truth lives. There were small charges that looked like errands but repeated too neatly, and repetition is a signature. A particular boutique grocery near downtown showed up every few weeks, always on the same weekday, always within a tight time window. A parking garage entry charge appeared alongside it, and the garage was not near my office or my usual routes. There were occasional rideshare receipts on my account, not many, but enough to suggest someone had used stored payment without thinking. The amounts were not catastrophic, and that was the point, because catastrophic charges get noticed and challenged. These were charges designed to float under attention, to be mistaken for background life. I started a simple table in a notebook, writing date, time, merchant, amount, and a quick note about location. I did not need a spreadsheet to feel clever. I needed a ledger to feel clean. When you write things down, you remove the ability to change your memory later, and that matters when the other person is skilled at rewriting the past. By noon, I had a list of clusters, and clusters imply routines. Dana's year away had not been some distant escape, not if her routines were tied to local merchants and local garages. That did not prove cheating, but it proved proximity, and proximity is the foundation of every lie she would try to sell me. I checked our shared cloud album next, not because I expected to find explicit messages, but because people forget that photos store more than faces. Dana had been careful on social media even before she left, always aware of what a post said about her identity. But cloud albums collect everything, including the accidental shots people never intend to show anyone. I did not hack anything, and I did not bypass any locks, because there is no glory in doing something illegal to prove someone else is dishonest. I only checked the shared spaces I still had access to, and I looked for metadata cues like dates and locations. Most of it was household junk, receipts photographed for returns, screenshots of delivery orders, random pictures of nothing. Then I found a folder Dana had shared long ago called New Start, and the name alone made my jaw tighten. The folder had been updated 3 times in the past 2 months, which was new activity for someone who had supposedly been gone and detached. Inside were photos of outfits laid out on a bed, mirror selfies cropped tight, and one picture of a white envelope on a table with a gold logo partially visible. The photos were not explicit, but the timing was, because the upload dates fell in the same windows as the boutique grocery charges. When I zoomed in on the envelope logo, I recognized the branding from the charity circuit that plastered the city every spring. Dana had not just returned to town, she had been planning a re-entry with props. I saved screenshots of the album metadata screens, focusing on the upload dates and the folder activity. Then I closed the album without scrolling further. I did not want to become a man who crawled through digital rubble for emotional scraps. I wanted a timeline that held up under daylight. I took a deep breath and went back to my notebook, writing down the album folder name, the updated dates, and the link between those dates and the merchant clusters. It was still circumstantial, but circumstantial evidence becomes structural when you stack enough of it. In the afternoon, I went downstairs to the lobby, not to interrogate anyone, but to observe. The building had a way of telling the truth without speaking, because people change their faces based on what they know. The doorman on duty was not Talia, but I greeted him politely and watched his response. He smiled, then his eyes flicked to my left, toward the seating area where a pair of women were sipping coffee and speaking in low voices. Their voices dipped when I walked past, and that dip was its own kind of confirmation. If Dana's return had been noticed, it had been noticed loudly enough to become lobby weather. I checked the corkboard near the elevators, where residents posted lost pet notes and personal training ads and whatever else they hoped strangers would pay for. Among the paper clutter were a few sleek event cards for a charity fundraiser at a hotel ballroom, the kind of fundraiser that called itself a gala because that word makes donors feel important. The card listed a date 3 weeks away and a nonprofit name printed in a tasteful font. I did not know whether Dana was involved with that organization, but my instincts tightened anyway, because her text had the tone of someone approaching a stage. A comeback needs an audience, and audiences are often rented through nonprofits. I took a photo of the event card and walked back upstairs, already planning the next steps. I needed to link Dana to a public arena without stalking her, because stalking is the behavior of someone desperate. I opened my phone and searched the nonprofit name, staying on public pages only, and quickly found their social profile. Their recent posts were full of smiling donors and posed committee shots, and the page had a pinned announcement about the upcoming gala. I scrolled slowly, not looking for Dana's face yet, but for names, tags, and locations. Then I saw it, tucked into a group photo caption from 2 weeks earlier. The organization thanked its board for planning, and the caption listed a handful of people by name with tags. Dana's name was not tagged in the caption, but someone else was, and that someone else had a public profile with a highlight reel of the planning process. I clicked into the highlights and watched short clips of committee tables, printed agendas, and hotel site visits. It was all harmless on the surface, the kind of content meant to prove transparency and competence. Then, in one clip, I saw the edge of a coat that looked like Dana's, and I saw a hand gesturing near a stack of program drafts. The clip was short, and the face was not centered, but the posture was familiar. More importantly, the highlight had a date stamp, and the date stamp aligned with the boutique charges and the parking garage entries. I captured a screenshot of the story highlight with the date stamp visible, and I saved the public post permalink as well, because links matter when people later pretend content never existed. This was not cheating proof yet, but it was a lie fracture. Dana had framed the year away as a private break, but she had been operating locally in public-facing spaces while still silent with me. That silence had not been because she was lost or healing. It had been tactical silence, designed to preserve optionality until she was ready to return on her terms. The more I looked, the clearer her strategy became. Dana wanted to walk back into marriage the way she walked into a gala, assuming the room would smile because she was dressed for it. She wanted to restore her status without paying the cost, and the cost was explaining the year away. She would try to make me the villain for questioning her, because people who control narratives always frame skepticism as cruelty. I could already imagine the story she would tell others if I refused. She would say she had found herself. She would say she had grown, and she would imply that my lack of immediate forgiveness proved I was cold. That story would play well in rooms full of people who only know her performance. I decided to create my own structure before she returned again. I wrote down 3 categories in my notebook: money timing, public optics, and witness reaction. Under money timing, I listed the recurring merchants and rideshare receipts. Under public optics, I listed the gala card, the nonprofit page, and the highlight date stamp screenshot. Under witness reaction, I listed Dana's ghost white face at the door and her inability to look past Talia. The categories were simple, and that simplicity mattered, because complex cases get lost in their own noise. That evening, my phone buzzed again, and Dana's name appeared on the screen with a new message. She asked if we could talk soon, and she framed it as reasonable and grown, as if she had not demanded a reset the day before. I did not answer immediately, because answering quickly would make her feel in control. I waited until the end of the night, then replied with a single line that we could meet in a neutral place in 2 days, and I suggested a cafe near the lobby where the staff knew my face. I did not mention the gala, and I did not mention the evidence, because early confrontation invites early countermeasures. I only wanted her to commit to a time and place she could not later deny. She agreed within minutes, which told me she had been waiting for the invitation to perform. The speed of her agreement made me uneasy, because it meant she believed she could handle whatever I brought. People do not return after a year with that much confidence, unless they think they have a shield. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then set it face down on the table. If Dana believed she could walk back into marriage with a script, then my job was to make the script useless. I would not fight her with rage, and I would not fight her with pleading. I would fight her with the one thing she could not charm into changing, which was a clean timeline backed by proof that belonged to the public world she loved. Before bed, I organized my screenshots into a folder on my phone labeled Dates, not because I liked the drama, but because I liked order. I printed the merchant alert page and the tagged story screenshot and placed them in a plain envelope, because physical paper forces you to respect what you have. Then I sat in the quiet apartment again and listened to the building settle, aware of how different the silence felt now. Dana was back in orbit, and orbiting objects always bring debris with them. I did not know yet who had opened that door for her over the past year, or who she feared more than me. But I knew one thing with certainty, and certainty is rare in marriages. If she had gone ghost white at the sight of a doorman, then her year away had not been clean, and her return was not a love story. It was a maneuver, and I had started drawing the map. I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, because punctuality is a quiet form of dominance when the other person lives on improvisation. The place sat half a block from my building, close enough to feel familiar and public enough to keep behavior clean. I chose a table where the staff could see me, where the door was in my line of sight, and where the lighting made it hard for anyone to play the wounded soul routine convincingly. I did not order food, because food creates comfort, and comfort invites concessions. I ordered coffee and watched the room, letting my mind run through the ledger I had built like a spine. Dana was late by 7 minutes, and the lateness was not a mistake. She had always used timing as a way to set the emotional temperature, arriving slightly late to force people into forgiveness mode before they even spoke. I used the 7 minutes to write a single line in my notebook, noting the meeting start time because I had decided that my memory was no longer allowed to be flexible. When she finally walked in, she looked dressed for an audience, not for a conversation, which told me everything I needed to know about her expectations. Her coat was clean, her hair was perfect, and her face held a careful softness that was meant to read as remorse from a distance. She saw me and smiled the way she used to smile when she wanted to reset a fight without admitting fault. She approached with that same practiced calm, then slowed down half a step, as if she remembered the doorway and the doorman and the color draining from her face. That moment of hesitation was small, but it told me she had replayed it too, and she did not like what it revealed. She sat across from me without asking, and she placed her phone on the table face down like a person announcing she had nothing to hide. People with nothing to hide do not need to stage it. Dana started with a version of sincerity that was almost believable, describing the year away as a necessary break and describing herself as someone who had grown. She framed her return as mature and final, as if she had completed a course and earned a certificate called Wife Again. She implied that I owed her a second chance because she was offering me the honor of her presence. I listened without nodding because nodding would have turned her words into a transaction. I asked calmly why she chose today and why she chose a text instead of a call. I kept the questions simple, because complex questions give liars room to dance. Dana answered in a smooth flow about not wanting to pressure me, about wanting to be respectful, and about wanting to give me space. The answer was polished, and it sounded like something she had practiced in front of a mirror. I noticed a repeated phrase she used twice, a phrase about turning a new page, and I wrote it down in my notebook without looking at the paper too long. When people rehearse, they repeat. When they repeat, they show you the shape of the script. I then asked where she had been during the year, and I asked it without heat, because heat makes the other person feel important. Dana offered vague geography and vague timing, describing different cities like they were phases rather than locations. She kept it abstract, implying that details did not matter because her feelings had been real. I asked one practical question that should have been easy to answer, which was whether she had been living locally in the past 2 months. Dana's eyes flicked left for a fraction of a second, as if she checked an invisible cue card. Then she said no, not really, not in any meaningful way. She tried to add a smile, but the smile came late. I did not accuse her of lying, because accusation is the cheap pleasure that ruins the expensive plan. Instead, I told her that while she was away, there had been activity tied to my payment methods and shared services. I did not say cheating, and I did not say theft, and I did not say affair. I said activity, because activity is a neutral word that still demands explanation. Dana's posture stiffened, and her hand moved slightly toward her phone before she stopped herself. She asked what I meant, and her tone shifted from soft to managerial, the way it does when she starts calculating risk. I slid my notebook forward a few inches, not close enough for her to read, but close enough for her to understand I had been counting. I described calmly the recurring merchants and the repeated timing windows. I described the fact that the charges were local, and I described how repetition creates patterns, even when the amounts are small. Dana tried to laugh lightly, suggesting that the world has many coincidences and that I was overanalyzing. That laugh did not reach her eyes, and her eyes were the only honest part of her. She offered an explanation that leaned on familiarity, implying that maybe a subscription had remained active, or maybe the account had been used accidentally. She implied that my attention to detail proved I had become cold. I watched her attempt to pivot from facts to character assassination, and I almost admired the technique. I told her I did not care how she labeled me, and I told her I cared about what happened and when. I then asked her to explain why a shared cloud folder labeled New Start had been updated during the same windows as those charges. I did not show her screenshots yet, because showing proof too early teaches the other person what to counter next. Dana's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed, and for a brief moment she looked like she wanted to stand up and leave. She recovered fast, saying she had been organizing old things and preparing to come home, and she framed it as romantic preparation rather than operational planning. She said she had been shopping and arranging her life to be worthy of me again, as if she expected gratitude for dressing up. I asked why the envelope photo in that folder had a charity logo, and I asked it like a person noting an odd detail, not like a person begging for truth. Dana's face tightened, and she answered too quickly, saying it was just an invitation someone had given her, and she had forgotten about it. She then shifted to a new topic, talking about how lonely she had been, and how the year away had made her realize what mattered. The shift was clean, but it was also obvious, because she needed to move away from anything with dates attached. I wrote another quick note in my notebook about the speed of her reply, because speed is often the loudest tell. I asked her about the doorway, because I wanted to see whether she could maintain her performance when I referenced the moment she lost color. I told her I noticed her reaction when the door opened and someone else was there. I did not ask what she was afraid of, because fear is too intimate a word. I asked simply whether she knew the doorman. Dana's throat moved as she swallowed, and she said she had seen the doorman before in passing. She implied it was nothing, a normal building interaction, and she tried to soften it with a smile. I watched her fingers tighten against the edge of the table, and the smile faded a beat too late. I leaned back and let silence sit between us longer than she liked. Dana hated silence, because silence forces her to fill the space, and filling the space creates contradictions. After a moment, she started speaking again, explaining that her reaction had been surprise and that she had not expected anyone else to be at the door. The explanation was weak, because surprise does not drain color from a face that fast. I did not correct her, and I did not push. I let her keep talking until she repeated another phrase, the same one about a new page, and I noted it again. Scripts do not just shape what people say. Scripts shape how they breathe. Dana then tried a different angle, the practical wife angle, suggesting we should talk about repairs, bills, and routines. She spoke as if she had never left, as if the year away had been a misunderstanding we could tidy up with a calendar. She mentioned a future event, an upcoming benefit, and she framed it as something we could attend together, a symbol of unity. The mention landed like a flare, because she had offered the gala without admitting she had been orbiting it already. I asked what organization it was for, and she said the name quickly, then followed with a comment about important community work. The tone she used was rehearsed, too careful, as if she were quoting from someone else's values. I asked whether she was on the board. Dana hesitated, then said she was helping in a limited way, not officially, nothing formal. She said it like a person trying to keep options open. I asked why she would invite me to a public event if everything was fragile, and why she would risk embarrassment if she truly wanted repair. Dana said she wanted to show people we were strong, and she said it like strength was a public service she could provide. That was when I understood the real motive under her return. She did not just want to be a wife again. She wanted the appearance of being a wife again, because appearances were currency in the rooms she was targeting. She reached across the table as if she might touch my hand, then stopped herself, remembering I was not the same man she had left behind. She asked if I still loved her, and the question was meant to drag me into an emotional arena where facts become cruel. I told her love was not the topic today, because love does not answer timelines. I told her if she wanted a path back into my life, it would start with clarity, not with performance. Dana's eyes flashed with irritation, then she recovered into softness again, but the softness now looked like a costume slipping off a shoulder. The conversation ended the way many of ours used to end, with her trying to leave a hook in the room. She said she had changed, she said she was ready, and she implied that if I did not accept her now, I would lose her forever. She wanted me to chase, because chasing makes her feel desired and forgiven at the same time. I did not chase. I told her we would speak again soon, and I told her it would be in a structured setting with clear boundaries. I suggested mediation because mediation creates minutes, and minutes create reality. Dana's face tightened again at the word. She stood, smoothed her coat, and tried to look like a woman walking away from a complicated man, not like a woman retreating from documentation. Before she left, she looked around the cafe as if checking who might have seen us, which made me almost laugh, because she could not stop performing even when she was losing. She walked out without touching her coffee, and I watched her through the window as she paused on the sidewalk, typed something fast, then slipped her phone away as if the message might burn her. I wrote down the time she left, not because I was petty, but because I was building a clean record of every move she made. After she was gone, I did not rush back home. I stayed seated long enough to let my pulse settle, because adrenaline makes you act like a fool. I opened my phone and checked the folder where I kept the screenshots. Then I closed it again, because I did not need to relive it. Instead, I did the next lawful thing, the boring thing, the thing that wins. I walked 2 blocks to a small corner where I knew Mara Voss sometimes passed on her evening loop, and I waited near the crosswalk like a man waiting for a bus. Mara appeared exactly as I expected, carrying a small bag, moving at a steady pace, looking like someone who had never once needed attention. I greeted her politely, and I asked if she had a moment. She did not smile, but she stopped, which was her version of consent. I asked her whether she had seen Dana recently over the past months, and I asked it in a way that did not sound like a jealous husband hunting for dirt. Mara looked past me toward the street, thinking, then gave me one sentence that landed like a brick. She said she had seen Dana entering the building late at night more than once, and she said the nights were not random, because the same tall, athletic man had been with her at least twice. I did not ask for a name, because names create drama, and I wanted structure. I asked for approximate dates, and whether she was certain about the association. Mara gave me 2 dates within the last month, and she described the man in simple details that matched the kind of person who would look good next to Dana in a photo. She then said she did not want to be involved further, and I told her she would not be. I thanked her and wrote the witness line in my notebook as soon as she walked away, capturing it in the cleanest language possible. One sentence, no opinions, no embellishments, because a neutral witness is valuable only when you do not poison it with your own emotion. On my walk back to the building, my phone buzzed with a merchant alert, a small charge at that boutique grocery, time stamped within the hour. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the cold certainty settle into place. Dana had just left my cafe, and somewhere in the city she was already moving pieces, already spending from a thread she assumed I would not notice. I saved the alert screenshot and put the phone away because the next phase was no longer about suspicion. The next phase was about catching her in two realities at once and watching which one she sacrificed first. The merchant alert sat on my screen like a finger-tapping glass, gentle and relentless, refusing to be ignored. The charge was small enough to look harmless, but the timestamp was the confession. Dana had walked out of my cafe 5 minutes earlier, and someone had just used the same thread of money she pretended did not exist. I stood in the building lobby with my phone in my hand, feeling the air change the way it does before weather turns. The doorman gave me a polite nod, and the polite nod had that extra half-second of attention people use when they know something is happening. Gossip does not need words when a building is small enough and a story is sharp enough. I went upstairs, locked my door, and forced myself to sit down before I made any decisions. Anger is a fast car with bad brakes, and I had no intention of ending up in a ditch because Dana wanted a spectacle. I opened my notebook and wrote the new charge into the ledger. Then I added a line about proximity to the cafe meeting. I did not write what I felt, because feelings do not hold up in rooms where people demand proof. I only wrote what I could point to, what I could show, and what I could repeat without my voice shaking. The calmness I practiced was not noble, it was practical. I needed to know whether the charge was part of the same pattern or a new tactic. If Dana had made a mistake, she would stop. If Dana was executing a plan, she would escalate. The safest move would have been to cancel the card and cut the thread immediately. But safe moves are not always smart when you are gathering a case. Cutting the thread too early would teach her that I was tracking her, and she would adjust her behavior into something cleaner and harder to prove. I decided to let the thread run one more step, but I would document it so tightly it could not be explained away later. I took a screenshot of the merchant alert. Then I opened my bank activity and captured the pending transaction line with the date and time visible. I printed the screenshot on my small home printer, signed the back with today's date, and slid it into a clear sleeve like I was preserving an artifact. It felt ridiculous until I remembered that ridiculous details are what make liars nervous. Then I did the boring part, which is the part that actually wins. I called the merchant, not to accuse them of anything, but to ask for a receipt copy for my records, using the tone of a man who treats paperwork like oxygen. I did not mention my wife, and I did not mention fraud, because that would turn a simple request into a drama. I said, I saw a charge, I needed the receipt copy, and I needed the time printed. The cashier sounded tired and routine, and she told me she could email a copy if I provided the last 4 digits and the date. I provided what she asked, thanked her, and ended the call before she could ask questions. A minute later, the email arrived with a receipt image attached, and the receipt included the timestamp and the store location. I saved the email with headers visible, then printed it, because paper is harder to gaslight. The timestamp told me the purchase happened while Dana was still within 3 blocks of me. That meant one of 2 things was true, and neither option made her look good. Either Dana was lying about being detached from my payment methods, or Dana was using the account as a deliberate pressure tactic, like a hand on my throat that never quite squeezed. The item list on the receipt was mundane, the kind of items someone buys when they want to look like they live clean. But the mundane does not matter. The time matters. Time is a knife, and I had just sharpened it. I opened the nonprofit page again and scrolled with patience, because patience is what Dana never expects from anyone. The gala announcement was still pinned, and the comment section was full of shallow praise from people who like to sound charitable. I clicked into the event details and found a link to a public RSVP page, the kind that tries to look exclusive while collecting names like trophies. The page was not fully open, but it displayed a sponsor list and a committee list, and the committee list mattered more. There, in the middle, was Dana's name, listed as a committee member with a role that sounded respectable and vague. She had told me she was helping in a limited way, not officially, nothing formal. The internet disagreed in plain text. I saved a screenshot of the committee list with the date and the page header visible. I also saved a screenshot of the page URL and the event title, because people later pretend screenshots are fake when you cannot show where they came from. Then I did something I hated doing, but it was necessary. I sent myself an email with the screenshots attached and a short note about when I captured them, because redundant documentation is how you prevent your own mind from being rewritten. When you deal with someone like Dana, you build a paper trail not because you love paperwork, but because you love sanity. That evening, Dana texted again, and the tone had changed. She did not ask how I was feeling, and she did not mention the cafe conversation. She asked whether I had talked to the building staff about her, and she asked it like a person casually checking the locks on a door. The question was too specific to be innocent, and it was also too revealing. Dana did not fear me, but she feared witnesses, and she feared documentation. I replied with one neutral line that I did not discuss private matters with staff, and I kept it true enough without giving her comfort. Then I turned my phone face down and let the silence do its work again. The next morning, I ran into Talia in the lobby, and I could tell she had been waiting for a moment when we would cross paths without it looking arranged. She handed me a small package that had been left at the front desk, and she did it with the same professional calm as before. The package was addressed to Dana, but it had been delivered under my unit number, which was a mistake a delivery driver could make if a name was spoken quickly. Talia did not open it, and she did not offer to, because she was not foolish. She only said the delivery came late last night, and she only said the courier asked for Dana by name. Then she paused, and her eyes held mine for a beat longer than normal. I understood what she was giving me, even without words. She was not giving me access, and she was not giving me secrets. She was giving me a clean fact with a clean timestamp, delivered in a way that kept her out of my mess. I thanked her, then took a photo of the package label while I was still in the lobby, with the building's digital clock visible in the background. The label included the courier name, the delivery time, and Dana's full name. I did not open the package, because opening it would turn a lawful observation into a violation. I carried it upstairs and set it on the kitchen counter like a piece of evidence that could speak without being touched. A few hours later, Dana texted again, asking whether any mail had arrived for her. The question came too soon after the package arrived, as if she were monitoring the delivery window. I replied that a package had been delivered under my unit number, and I asked her how she wanted to handle it. Her response arrived instantly, and the response was sharp, telling me to leave it with the doorman and not touch it. The urgency was pure fear, dressed as irritation. I wrote down the time of her response, because speed, again, was the loudest tell. Then I took the package back downstairs and left it with Talia, saying only that it belonged to Dana and that she had requested pickup. Talia nodded, professional as stone, and put it behind the desk without a comment. That afternoon I received an email from the cafe's payment system, a routine receipt that I had not requested. The email showed my purchase time, my table number, and the last 4 digits of my card. It was the kind of thing businesses send automatically. But to me it was a gift, because it anchored my meeting with Dana to an external system. If she later claimed she had not met me or claimed the timing was different, I had a neutral timestamp. I printed it and placed it in the same clear sleeve stack as the other documents. My kitchen table was starting to look like a quiet war room, and I felt nothing about it except a cold clarity. On day 3 of Dana's return, the building's group chat lit up with a message about parking issues and unfamiliar visitors. The message was not about Dana by name, but it did not need to be. Someone mentioned a tall man waiting near the entrance late at night, and someone else replied with a joke about residents having interesting guests. The joke was cheap, but the implication was expensive. Dana's year away had not ended cleanly. It had trailed back into this building in footprints other people could see. I took screenshots of the chat thread, not because I wanted gossip, but because it established community awareness, and community awareness becomes pressure when the story breaks publicly. That night I walked past the charity hotel where the gala would take place, not to lurk, but to look at the signage and the public schedule board in the lobby. Hotels love their event boards because they make the place feel alive. The board listed the nonprofit name and the gala date in neat letters, and beneath it was the committee setup schedule for volunteers. It was public, designed to be seen. I took a photo of the board with the date and time stamp on my phone visible in the corner. Then I stepped outside, stood under a streetlight, and breathed slowly until the adrenaline left my chest. I was not chasing Dana. I was walking in spaces she had already chosen to occupy publicly, and I was documenting what she could not later erase. When I got home, I opened the shared cloud folder again and saw something new. A fresh photo had been uploaded within the last hour, a picture of a seating chart draft with names blurred by motion, but 2 names were clear at the bottom, written in clean handwriting. Dana's name was there, and next to it was a man's name I did not recognize, placed like a pair. The photo was sloppy, the kind of sloppy people get when they believe no one is watching. I captured the metadata screen and the upload time. Then I captured the image itself, because even a blurred photo can be used to prove activity. I did not need the man's face yet. I only needed to prove Dana was planning a public scene while pretending she wanted private repair. I sat in my kitchen again, looked at the growing stack of sleeves, and felt the shape of the next move forming. Dana was building an image for a room full of donors, and she wanted me as a prop in that image. She had returned too confidently, and now I understood why. The gala was her stage, and the committee list was her shield. She believed that if she could stand beside me in public, she could erase the year away with a single photograph. But I had something she could not charm, and I could feel it tightening into a noose she had tied herself. I had dates, I had receipts, I had public pages, and I had neutral witnesses who spoke in simple sentences. I took one more sheet of paper and wrote a single question at the top. Then I underlined it hard enough to dent the page. I wrote, "What happens when her comeback needs a husband, but the husband refuses to be edited?" Then I placed the paper under the clear sleeves like a foundation stone. My phone buzzed again, and Dana's name lit the screen with a new message. She said the gala mattered. She said she needed me there, and she said we should present a united front. I stared at the words until they stopped looking like a request and started looking like a demand. Then I smiled once, quietly, because she had finally admitted the real game. And now I could decide exactly when to end it. By the time Dana started insisting on the gala, the whole thing stopped pretending it was about marriage and began admitting it was about optics. I could almost respect the honesty of that, because people like Dana rarely show you the true lever they plan to pull. She did not say she missed me, and she did not ask what I needed to feel safe again. She said the event mattered. She said she needed me there, and she said we should look united, as if unity was a jacket you put on for photos and hang back up at home. I stared at the message until the words felt like an invoice. Then I set my phone down and let the silence answer for me. The next step was not confrontation, because confrontation is where she is strongest, but positioning, because positioning is where she always gets careless. Dana believed the gala would reset everything because the room would reward the performance. and she believed I would cave because public pressure makes most people soft. She was wrong about me, but she was right about the room, and that meant I had to control when the room saw what. If I let her set the timing, she would flood the space with her narrative and leave me standing in the wake like a villain. If I set the timing, she would have to respond to documents, which is the only language she cannot manipulate into a confession. I called a mediator's office that afternoon, not because I wanted a warm conversation about feelings, but because mediation creates structure, and structure creates records. I did not mention cheating, and I did not mention revenge, because words like that turn normal professionals into cautious bureaucrats. I said my spouse had returned after a long absence, and we needed help setting boundaries and temporary terms, and the person on the phone asked the standard questions with standard distance. I booked the earliest slot they offered, which was 4 days away, and I wrote it into my notebook like it was a court date. Dana wanted a gala. I wanted minutes. Those two things do not coexist comfortably. Then I did something even more boring, which was checking the shared calendar, because boring is where lies die. Dana had not used the shared calendar in a year, but the account still existed, and it still reflected conflicts when she tried to plug herself back into the old routine. I exported a weak view as a PDF and highlighted the gaps with a marker. Then I laid the calendar printout on the table beside the merchant receipts. The dates looked like teeth, evenly spaced, biting into the same time windows over and over. A year away does not produce that kind of local routine unless someone is still living close enough to shop, park, and pose for committee photos. That evening, I walked down to the lobby and bought a bottle of water from the small vending area, not because I was thirsty, but because I wanted to look like a man doing normal things. People watch you harder when they sense you are hunting, and I refused to look like prey or like a predator. The doorman on duty nodded, and I nodded back, keeping my face neutral. The lobby smelled like clean stone and expensive air freshener, and the building's quiet felt like it was holding its breath. 2 residents stood near the mailboxes, pretending to compare packages while actually comparing stories, and their voices dipped when I approached. This was Dana's natural habitat, a place where people consume narratives for entertainment, and she had counted on that. She had also forgotten that narratives become dangerous when facts start showing up. When I returned upstairs, my phone buzzed with a new notification, and for a second, I felt the old reflex to dread her name. It was not her name. It was a shared cloud alert, the kind that tells you a folder has been updated. I opened it carefully, and there it was, a new image added to the New Start folder. It was a photo of a printed badge sheet, the kind used for events with rows of names and small squares where badges would be cut. The image was angled, like someone had snapped it quickly while walking, and most of the text was blurred by motion. But 2 badges at the bottom were clear, and one of them was Dana's name. The other badge was for a tall, clean-sounding name, Nolan Crane, printed beside hers as if they were part of the same packet. I did not feel rage the way I expected. I felt a cold click of alignment, because now the man in the shadow had a label. I took screenshots of the folder metadata and the upload time, then I saved the image itself. Then I printed both and signed the backs. I placed them in clear sleeves and stacked them with the rest, because the evidence ledger was becoming a physical thing in my apartment, something Dana could not charm into disappearing. I wrote Nolan Crane into my notebook with a line under it. Then I wrote a second line describing the badge sheet context, without adding any emotion. A name does not prove intimacy, but a name paired with her timing and her fear does more than hint. It points. I slept even worse than the night before, because now my brain had a new target to assemble around, and brains love assembling. In the morning, I forced myself to move slowly, to shave, to dress, to behave like a man who still owned his life. Then I took my car out and drove past the downtown parking garage that kept showing up in the charges. I did not circle it like a detective in a cheap film, because obvious behavior is weak behavior. I parked 2 blocks away, walked past the entrance once, and noted the signage on the public wall that listed the garage's name and management company. Then I walked away and wrote the signage details in my notebook. The garage itself did not matter. The consistency did. Dana had a routine anchored to that garage, and routines lead to witnesses. On my way back, I stopped at a small print shop and asked them to print a simple 1-page table for me on heavy paper. I gave them my own file, which contained only dates, times, merchants, and locations, no accusations, no commentary. The clerk printed it without curiosity, because people are used to printing boring things for boring reasons. That was the beauty of this method. I was building a weapon that looked like a spreadsheet, and spreadsheets do not look dangerous until they are projected in a public room. I carried the heavy paper back to my car like it was fragile, not because it was delicate, but because it represented something Dana could not out-talk. When I got home, I found a message from Dana waiting on my phone, and the tone had sharpened again. She said she had been patient. She said she needed clarity, and she said she deserved to know whether I was coming to the gala with her. The word deserved sat there like a bad perfume, strong and unwelcome. I replied with one clean line that we would not discuss public appearances until we had a structured conversation with a mediator. I did not argue, and I did not justify, because justification is how you invite negotiation. Dana responded fast, accusing me of punishing her, implying I enjoyed control now that she was trying to return. I read it once, then did not respond, because I had learned something important in the last year. People who feed on emotional exchange starve when you stop offering it. That afternoon, Mara Voss sent me a short text, the kind of message that tries to sound casual, even when it is carrying something heavy. She said she had seen Dana again last night, and this time she had seen the man more clearly. She described him in simple details: tall, athletic, haircut too deliberate, and she said he had carried a slim garment bag like he was headed to an event. She said they had entered through the side door that avoids the lobby cameras, the door residents use when they want to feel private. The line made my stomach tighten, not because of jealousy, but because it confirmed intent. Dana was not just drifting back into my orbit. She was staging her return with a partner who knew the angles. I wrote Mara's witness line into my notebook exactly as she gave it. Then I replied with a simple thank you and told her I would not ask her for more. I meant it, because witnesses are not tools, and I refused to become the kind of man who treats people as instruments. But I also understood that Dana's choice of the side door was an admission. She feared the lobby because the lobby had Talia. She feared Talia because Talia remembered. And if Dana remembered Talia, then Talia had seen something last year that Dana could not erase by returning with a smile. I went downstairs that evening at a time when Talia was on duty, and I did it with a neutral posture, like a man asking a simple building question. I did not ask her what she knew, and I did not ask her to get involved, because that would cross the line into favors. I only asked whether there had been any recurring visitor issues tied to my unit over the past year. Talia's expression did not change much, but her eyes sharpened in that way they do when a person decides what is safe to say. She replied that she could not discuss other residents' visitors, which was correct and professional. Then she added one sentence that was technically about building policy, not about my wife, and that sentence was the kind of sentence that becomes a key later. She said the building logs repeated side door misuse reports, and she said management had recently warned residents about it because it affects security. I thanked her, asked for nothing else, and walked back upstairs with my mind running quietly. Side door misuse reports meant there was already a building narrative forming, a narrative about someone trying to avoid eyes. It also meant the building management had paper, which meant there was an institutional trigger available that did not involve police and did not involve illegal access. Dana loved institutions when they protected her, but she underestimated them when they recorded her. That night, I organized my evidence into 3 packets, each one meant for a different kind of room. The first packet was for mediation, clean and minimal, focused on timelines and boundaries. The second packet was for a civil attorney, should I need one, again clean and minimal, focused on documented proof. The third packet was for the gala, which I did not want to use but which I prepared anyway, because preparation is how you deny someone power. The gala packet contained only 1 page, the heavy paper table, and 1 screenshot, the committee list with Dana's name. I placed them in a plain folder and wrote nothing on the outside. The less drama it looks like, the harder it hits. The next morning, Dana called instead of texting, which she rarely did unless she wanted to force immediacy. I let it ring because immediacy is her favorite trap. She called again 10 minutes later. Then she sent a message saying we needed to talk before the gala committee meeting that evening. That detail landed like a slip. She had not told me about a committee meeting that evening, and she had just admitted it existed. I stared at the message and felt the next move present itself with brutal clarity. If she had a committee meeting tonight, then she had a room, a time, and an audience of people who believed in her image. If she planned to bring Nolan Crane into that room, then she planned to rehearse the gala version of herself before the gala even happened. And if she was already nervous enough to call me twice, then something about that meeting made her afraid I could show up and ruin the rehearsal. I set my phone down, opened my notebook, and wrote a single line at the bottom of the page, forcing myself to keep it factual. Dana has a committee meeting tonight, and she is afraid of who might witness what. I did not know yet whether the meeting would happen in a public hotel space or in a private office, but I did not need to know that to feel the hook tightening. Dana had come back expecting to edit my life back into her story. Instead, she had begun leaving timestamps everywhere she touched, and now she was rushing, which meant her mask was slipping, which meant her next mistake would be bigger than the last. I did not answer Dana's calls, because urgency is her favorite weapon, and I had no intention of bleeding on her schedule. Instead, I treated her committee meeting like a weather system, something you study for patterns before you step outside. She had slipped and admitted the meeting existed, which meant she was either rehearsing her comeback or patching a leak she suddenly feared I could widen. Either way, the room mattered, because rooms create witnesses, and witnesses create consequences when paper arrives later. I sat at my kitchen table with the evidence sleeves stacked neatly. Then I added 1 more line to my ledger, noting her second call time and the committee meeting mention. It felt clinical, but clinical is what keeps you alive when someone wants you emotional. I kept my approach simple, because complexity creates mistakes, and mistakes are what Dana needs from me. I opened the nonprofit's public page and scanned for any mention of a meeting, any post, any comment thread that hinted at a location. There was nothing obvious, which told me the meeting was not meant to be public, but that did not make it private in a legal sense. Charity work loves semi-public spaces, hotel lobbies, coffee shops, co-working rooms, anywhere respectable people can feel busy. The hotel board I photographed earlier had a volunteer setup schedule, and it had listed pre-event planning times for the same week. Dana said tonight, which aligned, and alignment is enough when you are building a lawful map. I left my apartment with nothing that looked like a plan, only my phone, my notebook, and a clean face. I did not bring the gala packet, because showing up with paper would make me look like a man chasing a story. I wanted to look like a man passing through the same world she was trying to own. The hotel sat downtown under bright signage that made every guest feel important, and that was the point of it. The lobby smelled like polished wood and citrus cleaner, and the staff moved with practiced neutrality, which is what you get when a place sees both weddings and funerals in the same week. I walked in like I belonged there, because I did belong there, in the sense that my money had been spent in these patterns, and my name had been attached to her life for years. The event board was still by the elevators, and the nonprofit gala listing was still there, clean and confident. Beneath it, A smaller line listed a committee check-in window and a room name that sounded harmless, something like Aspen Meeting Room, designed to feel calm and expensive. I took a glance at my phone, not to record video like a teenager hunting for drama, but to check the time, because time is always the real suspect. Then I walked toward the corridor where the meeting rooms were, passing a bar area and a cluster of people in smart casual clothes holding branded folders. Nobody stopped me, which was its own confirmation that this was not a locked-door secret, just a controlled narrative space. At the end of the corridor, a folding table had been set up with a small sign and a stack of name badges. A woman in a volunteer lanyard stood behind it with the posture of someone who had been told to look cheerful no matter what. Her smile flickered when she saw me, then settled into polite default. I asked calmly whether this was the nonprofit committee check-in, and I asked it like someone who was supposed to be there. She said yes, and she asked for my name. I gave her my last name, because last names are what rooms like this care about, and because my last name was still linked to Dana's public identity, whether she liked it or not. The volunteer scrolled a finger down a printed list, then paused, and that pause held more information than any speech. She said my name was not on the list, but she said it as if she expected it should be. She asked whether I was attending as a guest or as committee support, and I told her I had been asked to stop by to pick up materials for Dana. The lie was small and safe, and it gave me access to a clean fact without forcing anyone to do anything wrong. The volunteer nodded, glanced down again, then said Dana had already collected her packet earlier, and she said it like she was reciting a log entry. I asked what time that was, keeping my tone light, and she answered without hesitation, because in her mind, it was just logistics. Dana had already been here, already acting like she belonged, already pulling a badge off a sheet that might as well have been a confession. I wrote the time in my notebook with a single neat line, then I asked whether the committee meeting was still on schedule. The volunteer's expression tightened, and she said there had been a change because the room was double booked and the group had moved upstairs to a lounge space near the mezzanine. She pointed toward the elevators, and she did it with relief, as if sending me away reduced the chance of conflict. I thanked her and walked back down the corridor without rushing, because rushing makes you look guilty, and guilt was not mine to carry. On the way to the elevators, I passed a tall man with a close haircut and a garment bag slung over one shoulder, moving with the confidence of someone who expects doors to open. He looked at me for half a beat, not with curiosity, but with evaluation, like he was matching my face to a story he had been told. I kept walking because acknowledgement would have turned him into an interaction, and interactions are what people like him use to gather leverage. When I reached the elevator bank, I caught my reflection in the mirror panel and saw my expression, calm and slightly bored, which was the only mask that works on predators. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped in with two older women who smelled like perfume and charity money. The mezzanine lounge was brighter and more open, a semi-public space designed for networking, which meant witnesses were inevitable. I stepped out and saw clusters of people with folders and lanyards, their voices low but active, the sound of planning mixed with self-congratulation. Dana was there, near a window, angled toward a group of committee members like she was giving them her best profile. Her coat matched the kind of coat someone buys to look permanent again. Beside her stood the tall man with the garment bag, now without it, holding a coffee as if he had always belonged in that circle. I watched them for 3 seconds, long enough to register their body language without feeding my own anger. They stood too close for strangers, and their closeness had the casual ease of routine. Dana saw me, and the color drained from her face again, the same ghost-white drop she had failed to hide at my door. It was almost impressive how consistent her tells were, like a signature she could not stop leaving. The man beside her turned fully, and I saw the same evaluating look again, then a quick flicker of a smile that did not belong in his eyes. Dana leaned slightly toward him, as if she were anchoring herself, and that anchoring told me what the year away had built. She had not come back alone, and she had not come back uncertain. She had come back with a partner in the room, and that was the real betrayal, not the sex, not the romance, but the strategy. A woman in a blazer with a clipboard moved through the group like a conductor, and people responded to her with quick nods and obedient smiles. She had the posture of a person who could control narratives without raising her voice. I watched her for a moment and understood that she was the real center of this room. Not Dana, not Nolan, not the donors. This woman was the one who decided what got recorded and what got forgotten. Dana had always chased rooms like this because they offered a different kind of power, the power to define what is respectable. If Dana had a shield, it would be a person like this, someone who could say the right words and make the wrong behavior sound like a misunderstanding. I approached slowly, not toward Dana directly, but toward the clipboard woman, because you do not fight the actor when the director is standing right there. I waited until she glanced my way, then I introduced myself as Dana's husband, keeping my tone neutral and professional. I did not mention the year away, and I did not mention reconciliation, because those words would have turned heads. I only said I wanted to confirm the schedule for the gala and understand where Dana's role fit, because I had received mixed messages. The clipboard woman's eyes sharpened as she measured me, then she offered a polite smile that looked practiced. She said Dana had told the committee that I was unavailable due to travel and personal boundaries, and she said it like she was reading from a short internal memo. Unavailable due to personal boundaries was a clever phrase, because it implied I was difficult without accusing me of anything. I felt something cold settle in my chest, not pain, but recognition, because Dana had already started pre-framing me as the obstacle. I asked calmly what time Dana collected her packet earlier and whether there was a sign-in record for committee pickups, because I wanted to make sure all materials were accounted for. The clipboard woman hesitated for the first time, then said the volunteer table logs were handled downstairs, and she said she could check if needed. I nodded, thanked her, and let the question hang without pushing, because pushing would have turned curiosity into suspicion. The goal was to plant the idea that records matter, because once records matter, liars start sweating. Dana stepped forward then, her face tight with a smile she could barely hold. She tried to steer the conversation into something private, something emotional, something that would make me look unstable in front of her audience. I did not give her that gift. I told her, with a calm expression, that I was only here to understand her commitments, because she had asked me to appear publicly with her, and I needed clarity. Her eyes flashed with anger, then she recovered into a soft expression meant to signal victimhood. I saw committee members glance between us, hungry for a story they could later retell as concern. Dana lived for those glances, and she had counted on them. She had not counted on me treating the whole thing like a logistics meeting. The tall man, Nolan Crane, stepped slightly to Dana's side, not in front, but close enough to signal alignment. He said nothing, but his posture said he was ready to intervene, which made me almost laugh, because men like that love playing protector when the real issue is paperwork. I looked at him once, then looked away, because looking away is how you refuse to assign importance. Instead, I focused on the badge table I could see from the mezzanine, where spare badges had been brought up in a small stack for late arrivals. I saw a badge sheet clipped to a board, and I recognized the layout from the cloud photo, which meant Dana's sloppy upload had been a mirror of this exact reality. I walked toward the spare badges like I was going to help, and nobody stopped me because helpful men are invisible in volunteer spaces. I leaned in just enough to see the top row of names, and I saw Dana's badge spot marked as picked up, with a small check mark beside it. I did not touch anything, and I did not photograph the whole list, because that would have been invasive. I only photographed the corner of the board where the timestamp note was written in pen, a simple note that said packets collected by 6/12 with the date. It was mundane, and it was perfect. Mundane notes are the kind of evidence nobody thinks to dispute until it is too late. As I stepped back, I heard the clipboard woman calling the committee to order, her voice steady, her tone designed to sound calm no matter what chaos moved under it. The group began to cluster around a long table, and Dana's chair was already set beside Nolan's chair as if it was the most natural thing in the world. That seating arrangement told me the truth with more clarity than any confession. Dana did not want me at the gala to repair us. She wanted me there to cover the fact that her public partner was already in place. I felt the urge to pull the whole room into my pocket and shake it until the truth fell out. Instead, I smiled politely, stepped away from the table, and left the mezzanine without another word, because leaving is how you keep control when the other person wants a scene. In the hotel lobby, I sat for 1 minute on a bench near the event board and wrote down what mattered. I wrote the volunteer's statement that Dana collected a packet earlier, the time, the location change, the note on the badge board, and the seating arrangement beside Nolan. I then saved the photo I took of the pen note and backed it up to my email, because redundancy is a form of insurance. My pulse was steady, and that steadiness felt almost unnatural, until I understood why. Dana had just shown me her real plan in public, and the plan was uglier than cheating because it was organized. Organized betrayal is the kind that collapses fastest when you introduce records. When I stood to leave, my phone buzzed with a new message from Dana, and the preview line on the lock screen showed a phrase that matched the script she had used in the cafe. She wrote about a new page again, and she wrote it as if repetition could hypnotize reality. I did not open the message in the lobby. I walked out into the night air, got into my car, and sat with both hands on the steering wheel, letting the streetlights paint clean lines across the glass. I understood now why she went ghost white at my door, and why she kept insisting on the gala. She was not afraid of my anger. She was afraid of me existing in the same room as her records. I drove home and placed one more printed photo into a clear sleeve. Then I laid the sleeves flat on the table like a quiet deck of cards. The next move was not a fight with Dana in private, because private fights are where she thrives. The next move was to choose a public moment where her allies could not rewrite what happened, and where her new partner could not stand beside her without becoming part of the record. I stared at the gala date on my calendar. Then I stared at the mediator appointment I had scheduled. 2 rooms were coming, 2 kinds of witnesses, and Dana had built her entire comeback on believing she could control both. I turned off the kitchen light and left the evidence on the table because some truths deserve to sit in the open. The mediation office smelled like toner and old carpet, which felt honest in a way Dana never was. I arrived early and sat in the waiting area with my folder on my knees, watching the clock like it was a witness. The receptionist offered a polite smile, then looked back down at her screen, already bored of other people's disasters. I liked that boredom, because boredom makes people neutral, and neutrality keeps records clean. I opened my folder once, checked the order of the sleeves, then closed it again, because confidence is a quiet weapon when someone expects panic. Dana arrived 5 minutes late, and the lateness was not accidental this time either. She walked in dressed like she was attending a board meeting, not a marriage triage session. Nolan Crane was not with her, which told me she understood the optics of bringing a replacement husband into a room meant for the original. She glanced at me, then glanced away too quickly, as if eye contact might turn her into a person instead of a plan. Her phone stayed in her hand, and I noticed the way she kept the screen angled away from everyone, like privacy was her last religion. The mediator came out and called us in with a calm voice and an expression that had seen too much to be impressed. His name was Elliot Crane, which made me blink once, because the world likes small jokes at your expense. I did not assume anything from the name alone, because assumptions are lazy, and lazy thinking gets you hurt. Elliot led us into a small room with a round table and a cheap pitcher of water, the standard set for people who want resolution but crave control. He explained the basic ground rules with a steady tone, and he said the session would be documented in summary form, not as verbatim minutes. Dana relaxed slightly at that, because summaries can be massaged later. I asked Elliot, politely, whether he would note any factual exhibits we presented and attach them to the case file. I asked it like a procedural question, not like a demand, and the mediator's eyes sharpened with interest. Elliot said he could acknowledge receipt of documents as exhibits if both parties agreed they were submitted. Dana's posture stiffened as if she had been nudged by an invisible hand. She had come here expecting a feelings conversation, and I was building a paper conversation. Paper is the enemy of performance. Dana began with the soft version of her story, the version meant to position her as a returning wife and me as a stubborn man. She described the year away as a growth period, described her text as a mature outreach, and described my response as cold and punitive. She used words like healing and new chapter in a rhythm that sounded rehearsed. I watched the repetition without reacting, because reacting would have made her feel powerful. Elliot listened with professional neutrality and asked basic clarifying questions about dates and living arrangements. Dana answered with vague windows, and the vagueness was the first crack. When it was my turn, I kept my voice even and kept my sentences short enough to stay clear, but long enough to feel deliberate. I said Dana left for a year with minimal contact, returned with a request for public unity, and immediately created new financial and scheduling conflicts. I said my goal was not punishment, and my goal was documented boundaries and clean separation terms. I said I wanted a temporary agreement on household access, shared accounts, and public representation. I did not say affair, because the word would have turned the room into a theater. I focused on behavior that could be proven, because proof is the only thing that makes a mediator stop being bored. Elliot asked whether I had documentation for the financial conflicts. I nodded once, opened my folder, and placed a single clear sleeve on the table, keeping the rest out of sight. Inside was the merchant alert printout I had signed, paired with the emailed receipt copy showing the timestamp. I did not slide it toward Dana like a threat. I slid it toward Elliot like a routine exhibit. Dana leaned forward, eyes narrowing, then leaned back as if the paper carried heat. She started to explain before Elliot even finished reading, and that impatience was its own confession. Elliot asked Dana whether she disputed that the charge occurred at that time and location. Dana said she did not recognize it, then immediately offered a theory about subscriptions and accidental billing. Elliot looked at the receipt again and asked how an accidental subscription produces a grocery item list with a matching timestamp. Dana shifted into a new explanation about helping a friend and using the wrong card, then said she had no intention of harming me. She was moving too fast, stacking stories like sandbags, hoping weight would substitute for truth. I watched Elliot's pen pause, and I watched his eyes lift toward her in a way that suggested he was noting the inconsistency. Elliot asked whether Dana had access to my payment methods during the year away. Dana said she did not, then corrected herself and said perhaps a card had remained saved on an old account. Elliot asked which account and what steps she took to remove it. Dana hesitated, then said she had intended to clean it up when she returned. Intended was a convenient word, because it makes negligence sound like care. I let the silence sit long enough for her to feel it. Then I placed a second sleeve on the table, one that showed the committee list page with her name and role. Dana's eyes widened, then tightened, because she could not deny what was printed publicly. Elliot asked Dana why she told me she had no formal role if her name was listed in an official capacity. Dana tried to downplay it, saying the list was outdated and the nonprofit kept names posted for continuity. Elliot asked how outdated the page was and whether she had requested removal. Dana said she had not had time, then said she planned to update it soon. Planned again, the same strategy with a different hat. Elliot's tone stayed calm. but I could hear the subtle shift that happens when a professional realizes the room is not filled with misunderstanding. It was filled with narrative management. Dana then tried to steer the conversation toward my character, suggesting I had become obsessive and controlling. She implied my documentation was evidence of instability, not evidence of responsibility. She described my calmness as coldness, and she described my boundaries as punishment. The words were sharp, but the structure of them was familiar, like she was reading from a guide written by someone who profits from chaos. Elliot did not react emotionally, but he asked one simple question that cut through her framing. He asked whether Dana had documented any safety concerns or filed any reports during her year away. Dana said no, then added that she had simply needed space, and she said it with a touch of indignation. I noted quietly that she had described me as controlling, but she had not treated me as dangerous enough to seek formal protection. Dana flinched, then tried to pivot again. Elliot asked both of us to focus on forward terms and asked whether we could agree on interim boundaries. I proposed that Dana not use my payment methods, not access my unit without notice, and not represent us publicly as reconciled. Dana pushed back hardest on the public representation term, which told me exactly what she valued. She did not care about money, because she could always find money. She cared about the room. Elliot asked why public representation mattered so urgently if the marriage was still fragile. Dana said the gala was important to her work and her reputation, then said she wanted to attend with dignity. Elliot asked whether that dignity required my presence. Dana said it would help, then said the community expected it, then said the committee would misunderstand if I did not show. She was layering pressure on top of pressure, trying to force a concession in the name of peace. Elliot asked whether the committee was aware Dana had been away for a year and was now returning suddenly. Dana's face tightened, because she did not like questions that touched her narrative. I offered a simple compromise that was not really a compromise. I said Dana could attend the gala independently, and I would not interfere with her attendance. I said I would not attend as her spouse, and I would not pose for photographs that implied reconciliation. I said any public introduction that described us as unified would be inaccurate and should be corrected. Dana's eyes flashed with anger, then she softened into a wounded expression meant to recruit Elliot's sympathy. Elliot did not take the bait. He asked Dana whether she could accept that boundary for 30 days while mediation continued. Dana said she would try, and try is another word people use when they mean no. Elliot then asked whether there were any third parties influencing the conflict, such as colleagues or committee leaders. The question landed harder than he probably intended, because I saw Dana's breathing change. She answered too quickly that nobody was influencing her, and the speed made the lie visible. I said, evenly, that Dana had been seen repeatedly with a tall man involved in the committee planning space. I did not name Nolan, because naming him would trigger a fight instead of a record. I described him as a consistent presence and said the association created public confusion and private mistrust. Elliot asked Dana if she wished to respond, and Dana said the man was a volunteer contact who helped with event logistics. She said it like a prepared label, a neat box meant to contain a messy truth. Elliot asked whether this volunteer contact attended the committee meeting with her and whether his involvement was documented. Dana said she did not know, then said the nonprofit managed volunteers informally. Elliot's pen paused again, and I recognized the moment. Professionals pause when they realize informality is a shield used by people who benefit from ambiguity. Elliot asked whether Dana could provide any written role description or volunteer list to clarify boundaries. Dana said she would ask the committee coordinator, then added that the coordinator was strict about privacy. The phrase "strict about privacy" sounded like another borrowed line, and it made my stomach tighten with recognition. Someone had taught her the right words to block questions. Elliot summarized the session in careful language and proposed interim terms: no shared account usage, scheduled communication through a single channel, no unannounced home access, and no public representation of reconciliation for 30 days. Dana agreed to the money and access terms with minimal resistance because she thought she could work around them. She resisted the public term again, then finally accepted it with visible reluctance. Elliot said he would issue a written interim memo and asked us to confirm receipt by email. I nodded once, because written memos are the beginning of real consequences. Dana nodded too, but her nod looked like compliance painted over resentment. When we stood to leave, Dana tried to catch me in the hallway, angling her body like she wanted a private moment. I did not stop. I walked past her calmly and went straight to the receptionist desk to confirm the email address for the interim memo. The receptionist gave me the address, and I asked her to repeat it once, then I wrote it down in my notebook with the date at the top of the page. Dana watched from behind, her face tight with a confusion that looked almost like fear. She had wanted a conversation she could edit. Instead, she had entered a process that created a file. Outside, the air felt colder, and the street noise felt sharper, like the city had turned up the volume to keep me awake. My phone buzzed as I walked to my car, and I glanced at the lock screen preview. Dana had already sent a message, implying I had humiliated her in mediation and that I was trying to control her reputation. I saved the message with a screenshot and did not respond, because her reaction was evidence now, not communication. Then another notification arrived, not from Dana, but from my email, confirming the mediation appointment details and reference number. I saved that confirmation and backed it up because it was my proof that the process had started on record. I sat in my car for a moment, hands steady on the steering wheel, thinking about the way Dana's language sounded borrowed and the way she panicked at the mention of third parties. Nolan was a problem, but he was not the engine. The engine was whoever coached her, whoever shaped her phrases, and whoever promised her the gala would erase the year away. Dana had always been ambitious, but she was not disciplined enough to build this kind of coordinated narrative alone. Someone was directing her, someone who understood committees, minutes, and image management. I did not need a name yet, because names come later when the record is ready. For now, I only needed the next 30 days to stay clean, stay lawful, and keep stacking truths until her scaffolding collapsed under its own weight. That night, the mediator's memo arrived in my inbox with a subject line that looked ordinary, but the attachment inside felt like a switch being flipped. I saved the email with headers visible, printed the memo, and signed the back with the date, because habits keep you consistent when emotions try to break you. Dana had wanted the gala to be her reset button. Now there was another button in play, a button labeled interim terms, and it was backed by a professional file. I slid the printed memo into a clear sleeve and placed it on top of the stack like a quiet crown. Then I opened my calendar and looked at the gala date again, and I felt the hook tightening in my chest. Dana had 30 days to obey the public boundary, and she would hate every second of it. People like her do not stop performing. They only switch costumes. If she could not use me as a prop, she would use someone else, and that someone else would be Nolan, standing beside her in the brightest room she could find. I stared at the evidence sleeves under the kitchen light and understood the next phase with brutal clarity. The gala would still happen, and Dana would still try to control the room, but now she would do it while fighting a documented boundary. And when someone performs under pressure, they make mistakes loud enough for witnesses to hear. The mediator's memo should have calmed things down, at least for people who are capable of being calmed. Dana treated it like a temporary inconvenience, the kind you smile through until you can replace it with a better story. She obeyed the money boundary for exactly long enough to pretend she respected it, and she obeyed the home access boundary because she knew a lock and a witness would make her look desperate. The public boundary was the one she could not tolerate, because it clipped the wings of the version of her she wanted the neighborhood to see. I could feel her fighting it in the small ways she moved, in the sudden bursts of texts, in the way she kept trying to drag me into conversations that did not leave paper behind. The building's group chat started buzzing again 2 days after mediation. Not about me directly, but about the gala. Someone posted a photo of the hotel lobby event board and wrote something about how exciting it was to see local leaders gathering for a good cause. Another person replied with praise for Dana's return, as if she had been away on a philanthropic retreat instead of a year-long disappearance. I read the thread without responding, then saved screenshots of the posts with the timestamps visible. It was not the praise that mattered, it was the framing. Dana was already being presented as a triumphant figure, and the room was being trained to see any disruption as cruelty. Dana's next move was small, and that is how you know someone is planning something bigger. She sent a message saying she wanted to coordinate arrival at the gala, and she wrote it like it was a simple logistical question. I replied with one clear line that the interim terms were active and I would not be attending as her spouse. I kept it polite enough to look reasonable and firm enough to close the door. She did not argue immediately, which was unusual, and the lack of argument made my skin tighten, because silence from Dana is rarely peace. Silence from Dana is usually staging. That night, my phone lit with another merchant alert, and I saw the same familiar pattern, a modest charge that looked too clean for a mistake. The merchant name was a formal wear rental place near the hotel, and the timestamp was early evening, the same time she had claimed she was at a planning call from home. I opened the alert and saw the last 4 digits of the card, my card, the one she insisted she was no longer using. I saved a screenshot of the alert, then opened my banking app and captured the pending transaction line with date and time visible. I did not feel shock anymore, and I did not feel jealousy because she had burned those nerves down already. What I felt was something closer to mechanical clarity, because each new charge was a nail she was hammering into her own narrative. I did not call her, and I did not text her to accuse, because accusations are a gift to someone who survives on emotional friction. I called the rental place with a neutral tone and requested a receipt copy for my records. The clerk asked the normal questions and sent an email within minutes. The receipt image showed 2 rental items, one tailored to a taller body type, and one listed as an add-on accessory that made the whole thing feel like a coordinated outfit plan. The name printed was not mine, but the payer line showed the last 4 digits of my card. I printed the email with headers visible, printed the receipt image, and signed the backs with the date. Then I added a new entry to the ledger, keeping it simple and cold, because simple and cold is how you prevent your mind from being dragged into melodrama. The next morning, I made a move that was dull enough to be powerful. I went to my bank branch and requested a civil account separation action for discretionary spending, the kind that restricts certain joint-use behaviors without turning into a criminal accusation. I did not say theft, and I did not say fraud, because those words create heat, and heat creates resistance. I said there had been repeated unauthorized use of my card by a spouse from whom I was separated under interim mediation terms, and I wanted to limit exposure while discussions continued. The banker listened, asked for the mediation reference number, and nodded in that professional way that means the paperwork is more important than the story. She printed a confirmation page with a date and a case reference, and I took a photo of that printout at the counter with the bank's clock visible in the background. Then I placed the printout into a clear sleeve like it was a passport. By the time I left the bank, the air felt different, lighter in a grim way, because I had just removed one of Dana's easiest levers. She would still try other angles, but the money thread was tightening, and that meant she would turn harder toward reputation, because reputation is the last currency people like her believe is real. On my drive home, my phone buzzed with a notification from the shared cloud folder again. This time, it was not a photo, but a document, a draft program insert for the gala, uploaded with a neat file name that suggested it was final. I opened it and scrolled carefully, because documents are often where people hide the truth behind polite fonts. Halfway down the program, in the sponsor section, was a line thanking a couple's leadership circle for exceptional support. And under that line were two names set next to each other in a formatting choice that looked innocent. One name was Dana's. The other name was Nolan Crane's. It was presented as if it was normal for a married woman to be publicly paired with a man who was not her husband, and the audacity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I captured screenshots of the file properties, the upload time, and the section where the names appeared. Then I downloaded the file and saved it to my own folder, because anyone who uploads drafts also deletes drafts when panic hits. The next message came from Dana an hour later, and it was a classic move, sweetened pressure in polished wrapping. She wrote that the program drafts were just internal formatting and nothing should be taken seriously, and she wrote that Nolan was only a logistics volunteer being acknowledged for help. She wrote that I was looking for problems, and she wrote that the neighborhood was watching how I handled this. The neighborhood was the threat, and also the bait. She wanted me to react in a way that could be screenshotted and forwarded, the way someone forwards proof of instability to justify their own betrayal. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of her message, saved it to my evidence folder, and let her sit with her own words. That afternoon I got a text from Mara Voss that was shorter than usual, which told me she was nervous about being seen as involved. She said she had overheard Dana on the phone in the lobby that morning, talking to someone about correcting the introduction and making it look seamless. Mara added one detail that mattered more than anything else, that Dana mentioned an on-stage moment, not just a photo moment. I wrote down Mara's witness line in my notebook exactly, including the time and location. Then I texted Mara back with a thank you and told her I would not ask for anything else. I meant it, because I was not building a case by turning my neighbor into a weapon. I was building a case by letting Dana's own coordination become the weapon against her. That night, I returned to the hotel again, not to spy, not to lurk, but to move through the same public spaces Dana used as if they belonged to her. The lobby was busy, and the bar area had clusters of committee members doing last-minute planning while pretending it was casual. I ordered a coffee and sat at a small table with a view of the event corridor, keeping my posture calm, like a man waiting for someone else, not a man collecting a story. A hotel staff member rolled a cart past me loaded with program booklets and badge lanyards, and one booklet slipped slightly on the top stack. The staff member adjusted it without looking, and the booklet's cover page flashed the gala title and date in clean print. When the staff member parked the cart near a side table to check something at the desk, I stood and walked past, not stopping, not reaching, only glancing as if I were casually reading the cover design. A loose insert had been tucked inside the top booklet, and I could see a corner of the paper sticking out with a bold header. It looked like a final schedule, the kind printed for staff and committee leads. I did not touch it. I did not pull it out. Instead, I walked to a different angle and took a photo of the cart from a distance, capturing the visible header corner and the date on the booklet cover in the same frame. It was not perfect, but it proved the schedule existed in printed form and was being distributed. Proof of distribution matters because it defeats the later claim that something was just a draft. As I sat back down, I noticed Nolan across the lobby near the elevators, wearing a suit jacket that fit too well to be casual. Dana was not with him, which made it worse, because it meant he was moving independently in her world like he owned space. He spoke briefly to the clipboard woman from the mezzanine, the one who seemed to control the room, and she handed him something that looked like a badge packet. Nolan glanced around once and his eyes swept past me, then stopped, then moved on. The slight hesitation told me he had recognized me from the committee meeting, and the recognition told me he would alert Dana. I let him because alerts make people rush, and rushing makes people sloppy. When I returned home, my phone buzzed with a new notification, not from Dana, but from the bank, confirming the discretionary separation request had been processed. The message was clean and formal, and it contained a case ID. I saved a screenshot, then printed it, then signed the back. Dana had been using my money thread to keep her hand on my throat, and now that hand was losing strength. She would compensate by tightening the reputational rope, and the program insert pairing her with Nolan was already proof of the direction she had chosen. I placed the printed program screenshots, the formalware receipt, the bank confirmation, and Mara's witness note into the same evidence stack. Then I sat and stared at the pile until it looked less like paper and more like gravity. Dana texted at midnight, which was another tell, because midnight messages are designed to feel intimate and urgent. She wrote that the gala committee had decided I should be acknowledged in a special way, and she wrote that it would help everyone move on. The phrase, help everyone move on, was a lie dressed as kindness. People do not move on when they are being trapped on stage. People move on when a narrative has been sealed, and she was trying to seal hers. I saved a screenshot of the message and did not respond. Then I opened my calendar and saw the gala date sitting there, like a deadline. I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that Dana was not merely going to show up with Nolan. She was going to use the stage to rewrite the year away, to frame me as forgiven and supportive, and to present Nolan as nothing more than a helpful volunteer, even as her program draft paired their names like a couple. She was trying to use public applause as a stamp of truth, because she believed applause could overwrite records. I leaned back in my chair, looked at the heavy paper one-page table I had printed, and imagined it projected under bright hotel lights with no commentary, just dates, places, payments, and the silence that follows. Then I felt my phone vibrate again with a new message preview from Dana, and the first words were the ones I had been waiting to see, the ones that told me she had made the decision to force the moment. She wrote that security would escort any disruptive guests out of the room, and she wrote it like a warning, but it read like fear. The morning of the gala arrived with the kind of bright winter light that makes everything look clean, even the lies. I woke early, not from nerves, but from the habit of being ready before someone else decides the tempo. Dana's midnight warning about security sat in my phone like a cheap intimidation tactic, and it only confirmed what I already knew. If she felt safe, she would not threaten me with removal, and if she threatened removal, she feared what I could place on record. I showered, dressed, and moved through my apartment with deliberate calm, because panic is the costume Dana always tries to drape on me. I did not plan to crash the gala like a jealous husband in a bad story, because that would feed her narrative perfectly. I planned to arrive like a person who belongs in public, because I do, and I planned to let paper do what anger never can. The folder on my kitchen table contained only what I could defend without drama, and I reviewed it in a simple order. First, the bank confirmation of discretionary separation, because it showed a formal boundary had been triggered. Second, the formalware rental receipt and email header, because it tied my payment method to her coordinated optics. Third, the program draft screenshot pairing her name with Nolan's, because it proved intent to present a public partnership. Fourth, the badge pickup time note and committee seating observation, because it proved routine and closeness. Finally, my one-page table, heavy paper, neat columns, no commentary, only dates, places, and payments. I made a second folder with a different purpose, smaller and simpler, a single clear sleeve with one page inside. That page was the one most likely to survive scrutiny in a bright room under social pressure. It was the program draft screenshot with the upload timestamp and the names side by side, because it could be understood in 5 seconds by anyone who could read. People do not need a courtroom to recognize a married woman publicly paired with another man. They only need a line of print that makes their eyebrows lift before their loyalty can catch up. I put that sleeve into a plain manila envelope and wrote the date on the back, because small rituals keep you steady. I left the apartment before Dana could send another message designed to shake my focus. In the lobby, the doorman nodded with the careful neutrality of someone who has heard whispers but refuses to become part of them. I nodded back, and I kept my face mild, because mild faces invite fewer questions. Outside, the air was sharp enough to make my eyes water, and I welcomed the sting because it reminded me I was still in control of my body. I drove downtown with the radio off, letting the city's hum fill the car like static that could not form into a story. At the hotel, the valet line was already busy, and the entrance swarmed with dressed-up donors and committee members moving in clusters. I parked myself in a public garage 2 blocks away because I did not want my car tied to the hotel's internal valet chatter. Walking toward the lobby, I felt the social gravity of the event pulling at everyone who approached, that strange mix of charity and vanity that makes people behave like actors even when nobody asked them to audition. Inside, the lobby glittered with warm lights and polished surfaces, and the air smelled like perfume, cologne, and expensive certainty. I did not head straight to the ballroom because the ballroom was Dana's stage, and I was not yet ready to step into her lighting. I moved to a quieter corner near the event corridor where staff clustered by carts and clipboards. I ordered sparkling water at the bar, tipped politely, and sat where I could see the flow of people without looking like I was watching. The corridor buzzed with early arrivals, and each time the elevator opened, more bodies poured out, carrying gift bags and practiced smiles. The hotel wanted the night to feel inevitable, and that inevitability was exactly what Dana had hoped would bury the messy year away. I watched Nolan appear near the corridor entrance, talking with the clipboard woman, the coordinator whose posture had the calm power of someone who can decide what gets recorded. Nolan's suit fit him like it had been tailored for this exact moment, and his confidence looked purchased, not earned. He laughed at something the coordinator said, and the laugh was quick, controlled, the kind of laugh people use when they want to look easy. I noticed his badge lanyard, a committee color, not a regular guest color, and I noted it in my head as another small confirmation. Dana had not brought a lover to a gala. She had installed him into the machinery. Dana arrived 10 minutes later, entering the lobby like a person returning to a throne. Her dress was elegant in that restrained way that signals money without begging for attention, and her hair was styled as if she had rehearsed the angle of every photo. She moved toward Nolan without hesitation, then paused just long enough to greet 2 donors with warm smiles and soft touches to their arms. She was a perfect performer, and she had always been, which is why it had taken me so long to accept that performance was not a temporary mask. Performance was her real face, and intimacy was the mask she wore at home. I stayed seated because the first move at a social war is often patience. I waited until Dana's eyes swept the lobby and found me, because she always needed to locate the threat before she could pretend to be safe. When she saw me, her smile tightened, and her shoulders pulled back slightly, as if she had just been reminded the room had rules she did not fully control. She angled herself toward Nolan, and he followed her gaze. Then his eyes landed on me with the same evaluating look as before. He said something to her, and Dana's mouth formed a quick reply, her lips barely moving, like she was determined not to let anyone read her reaction. Then she looked away, and that look away was not confidence. It was triage. My phone buzzed with a message from Dana, and I did not need to open it to know the content. I waited, finished my water, and only then checked the lock screen preview, because timing matters even when you are reading threats. She wrote that I was violating the interim spirit, and that I should leave before I embarrassed myself. The phrasing was almost amusing, because it implied my embarrassment mattered more than her deception. I saved a screenshot and did not reply, because replies create a thread she can weaponize. Silence, in contrast, creates a vacuum, and vacuums make liars overtalk. I stood and walked toward the corridor at a calm pace, not rushing, not prowling, simply moving like a guest heading to a seat. The ballroom doors were open, and inside, I could see round tables, white linens, candles, and the soft glow that makes everyone look more innocent than they are. A stage sat at the front with a podium and a screen behind it, currently showing sponsor logos in rotation. Staff placed programs on chairs and adjusted centerpieces with the attentive energy of people who want the night to feel seamless. Seams are where truth leaks, and Dana had been leaking seams everywhere. At the registration area, a volunteer greeted me with a polite smile and asked for my name. I gave it, and the volunteer checked a tablet list, then paused, just like the last time, because pauses carry information. She said my name was not listed, then added that Dana had been listed as a lead committee member, and her guest allotment was already assigned. Guest allotment, as a phrase, sounded like an invitation to be controlled. I thanked the volunteer and said I would handle my own ticket. Then I purchased a seat with a simple payment and asked for a receipt. The volunteer printed it without question, because money always smooths social friction. I took a photo of the receipt beside the lobby clock, then slid it into my inner pocket, because even my entrance would be documented. Inside the ballroom, I found my table and sat down without fanfare. The seat placements were already set, and the names on the place cards were familiar enough to tell me Dana had arranged this room with intention. My table held donors, a local business owner, a committee secretary, and a couple who looked like they had practiced smiling in mirrors. I nodded politely, introduced myself with neutral warmth, and kept conversation light. I did not mention Dana, and I did not mention anything personal, because my goal was to be seen as steady and normal. When people later tried to describe me as disruptive, they would have to fight their own memory of how calm I looked. Across the room, I saw Dana's table near the front, the kind of placement reserved for leaders and faces. Nolan sat at the same table, 2 seats from her, close enough to be part of her orbit, far enough to look deniable if someone demanded distance. The coordinator sat near them too, like a guardian of the narrative. I watched Dana laugh with a donor, then touch Nolan's forearm briefly as she turned, and the touch was casual enough to be plausible, intimate enough to make my stomach tighten. I did not let my face change, because faces betray you before your mouth ever does. Instead, I took a sip of water and looked away, letting the moment become one more silent entry in the ledger. The event began with the usual speeches about community and impact, the kind that make people feel good about their checks. The lights dimmed slightly, the screen brightened, and a video played showing smiling volunteers and grateful recipients. Applause filled the room in waves, and each wave sounded like approval being manufactured on demand. Dana clapped at the right moments, her posture poised, her expression generous. Nolan clapped too, and he clapped like a man who believed this room belonged to him already. I watched the way his badge lanyard caught the light, and I realized Dana's plan was deeper than a public pairing. She wanted Nolan to look institutional, like he was woven into the charity's fabric, so that any suspicion would look like paranoia. Then came the segment where the coordinator stepped onto the stage to acknowledge the leadership circle and committee leads. She spoke into the microphone with a steady voice, reading names from a printed list with practiced warmth. People stood, smiled, waved, and sat, each acknowledgement turning into a public stamp of legitimacy. When Dana's name was read, she stood gracefully and accepted applause like she had earned it through sacrifice. The coordinator's eyes flicked to the screen behind her, and the screen changed to a slide with names in neat columns. I saw Dana's name, and beneath it, in the same line weight, I saw Nolan Crane's name. The room did not gasp, because polite rooms do not gasp, but I saw heads tilt slightly, and I saw eyes shift, and I saw the subtle movement of people processing an inconsistency they did not want to name. Dana remained standing for half a beat longer than necessary, her smile tight, her gaze locked forward, as if she could force the room to accept whatever the screen declared. Nolan stood too, and he did it smoothly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That was the moment Dana had been building, the moment where public applause could overwrite private reality, and I felt my pulse stay steady because the screen had just done half my work for me. My hand slipped into my inner pocket, and touched the edge of the manila envelope, and I kept my posture relaxed, as if I were merely adjusting my jacket. I did not stand yet, because standing too early would look emotional. Instead, I waited for the applause to crest and begin fading, because fading applause creates a silence that can be shaped. The coordinator smiled, thanked the room, and said there would be a brief transition before the next segment. Staff moved subtly, and the lights shifted, preparing the room for another round of scripted warmth. Dana sat down slowly, still smiling, but I saw the tension in her shoulders, the tiny tremor that suggested she had noticed the same tilt of heads I had seen. Nolan leaned toward her, murmuring something, and Dana nodded once without looking at him, as if even she understood the pairing slide had crossed a line. I stood at my table and walked toward the coordinator's side of the room, not rushing, not pushing past anyone, moving like a guest with a legitimate purpose. A staff member stepped toward me with a polite, intercepting smile, and I saw security a few feet away, attentive but not aggressive. Dana's warning about being escorted suddenly felt less like a bluff and more like a prepared script. I kept my expression mild and held the manila envelope at my side, like it contained nothing more than a program correction. The staff member asked if I needed assistance, and I said I needed to hand a document to the coordinator for the official record, because there was a factual mismatch on the recognition slide that could embarrass the organization. The staff member hesitated, because embarrassment is a word that wakes people up. The coordinator glanced toward us, eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed whether I was a problem or a fix. I stepped closer, careful to keep distance and respect, and I held out the envelope without raising my voice. I told her, calmly, that the program draft file in the shared folder had paired Dana with Nolan as a couple sponsor line, and the live slide had repeated it. I said I had a time-stamped screenshot and a request for a correction in the official minutes of the event planning, because donors deserved accuracy. The coordinator's smile froze for a fraction of a second, then returned, tighter than before. Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then to my face, then past me toward Dana's table. Dana was already standing again, and this time the ghost-white look had returned fully, bleaching the color from her carefully prepared face. She took one step forward, then stopped, as if the room itself had become a trap she could not escape without looking guilty. Nolan rose too, but his smile had vanished, replaced by that sharp, evaluating stare. The coordinator reached for the envelope, hesitated, and I saw her calculating the risk of taking it versus refusing it. In that small hesitation, I understood the real fight was not between me and Dana. It was between truth and whoever controlled the minutes. The coordinator took the envelope, and the security guard's posture shifted, as if awaiting a cue. Dana's mouth opened, as if she wanted to speak, but the microphone was not in her hand, and the room was too quiet for her to improvise without consequences. I watched her eyes move, searching for an angle, and I realized she was about to gamble everything on, forcing me to look like the disruption. I felt the weight of my folder back at my table, the heavier evidence I had not yet revealed, and I understood that the next 30 seconds would decide whether the room became her stage or her courtroom. The coordinator did not open the envelope on stage, because she was too practiced to create a spectacle without control, but she also did not hand it back, because returning it would look like concealment. She held it at her side, nodded once, and said she would review the document immediately with the event team. The words sounded polite, but I saw the message behind them, a warning that I would not be allowed to steer the room by myself. Security hovered closer, not touching me, yet making their presence loud without sound. Dana stood frozen at the edge of her table, her face drained, her hands hovering as if she wanted to grab the narrative back by force. I kept my posture calm and stepped half a pace backward, giving the coordinator space, because space makes my restraint visible. Then I raised one hand slightly and asked, in a neutral tone, that the correction be noted on record, because the recognition slide had paired Dana with Nolan publicly. The coordinator's eyes tightened, and she glanced toward the committee secretary seated near the front. The secretary nodded slowly, the kind of nod that means she understood the risk of ignoring a documented complaint. Dana tried to speak, but she stopped when several donors turned their heads toward her, waiting for an explanation she had not prepared. The coordinator signaled for a brief recess, and the lights softened as staff moved in practiced formation. She stepped off the stage and walked toward a side corridor with the envelope, the secretary, and a staff lead. Nolan started after them, and security stepped between him and the corridor with calm firmness. That single block was more humiliating than shouting because it framed Nolan as a problem in a room built for reputations. Dana followed at a measured pace, attempting dignity, but her eyes kept flicking toward me like she expected me to lunge. I did not move because the power was in my stillness. Within minutes, the coordinator returned, face composed, holding a single sheet rather than my envelope. She took the microphone and announced a correction, saying the previous slide had contained an administrative pairing error and would be amended in the official event record. She did not apologize publicly because apologies create stories, and she was trying to prevent stories. But she did say the words "evidence received," and the committee secretary typed something on her laptop in full view of the front rows. Dana's shoulders sagged as if a wire inside her had snapped. The coordinator then asked Dana calmly to confirm the correct sponsor line for the record. Dana's lips parted, and for a second she looked like she might lie again, but the room was watching, and the secretary's fingers were already poised. Dana forced out a correction that separated her name from Nolan's, and the separation sounded like a confession wrapped in formality. Nolan stared at the floor, then turned and walked toward the exit doors, not running, but moving fast enough to look guilty. Dana watched him go, and in that glance her performance slipped, revealing the panic underneath. I returned to my table, sat down, and let the silence finish the work I had started.